This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, good morning, Rabbi. It's the Tuesday before Yom Kippur. It's also one of our last opportunities to learn about Parshas Haberacha. So I want to use today to learn a very important inyan about Yom Kippur, specifically Ne'ilah, and a very important inyan about the last few psukim of the Torah, the last few psukim of Haberacha. Ne'ilah, of course, is the end of the game, the final moments. And Rabbi Yaakov Emden writes in his Siddur about Ne'ilah, he says, V'im lo yachshav emasai. Good kasha. But still, the kates for the din is Yom Kippur. That's when it's a nechtav. Says Rabbi Yaakov Emden, V'im lo yachshav, not now emasai. Yagia isratzon leheyanos. When will there be a opportune time? V'hachalosh yoymer gibarani. And the weak man, you're hungry, you're tired, you're worn out, you're thirsty, but you should say, I'm a gibar. V'yoisif oimetz b'tfilah zu. You should increase strength in the tefillah. Lishbach lev kamayim v'tal shavosay hashamayim. To pour out your heart like water, and your outcry could go up to heaven. Says Rabbi Yaakov Emden, a very important thing, that one should try to bring themselves to tears during the Ne'ilah. One should try to be yoyrei demois during the Ne'ilah. Says Rabbi Yaakov Emden, Shal yidei habechi bekavana, by crying with kavana, yuchal hagzar din l'hisapich l'toiva. The gzar din, the decree, could turn to the good. Tears are very powerful. It could transform a gzar din, and he gives the following illustration from the Zohar. He says, remember Basia Bas Paroi? Basia Bas Paroi, she's bathing in the water, and she sees the little infant carriage or floater. She sees a little kid floating on the water, and in the first she wants to have Rachmanis on the kid, but then she knows her father's decree. She knows her father issued a decree that anyone who saves a Jewish child will be off with their head. She knew she couldn't violate the decree of her father.
Well, how'd she know the child was Jewish?
But actually on that day it was decreed on all, and she saw. And then amazingly the pasuk says, Vatirehu, she sees him. Should I take him? Should I not take him? Should I take him? Should I not take him? V'hinei nar boicha. The kid was crying. Vatachmal alav, and she had rachmanas on the kid, because you can't turn away a crying child. So says Rabbi Yaakov Emden, Ne'ilah, we stand before the Ribbon Shalom, Avichem Shema Shamayim, even if we're unworthy, even if we're not deserving, through Bechia, through tears, the Ribbon Shalom will not be able to turn away a crying child. And if a Basar V'dam like Basia was not able to turn away a crying child, so then the Ribbon Shalom Alachas Kama Makama. So I want to speak a little bit about the Kayach of Demois in Tefillah, the power of tears, and then explain what that has to do with the last few psukim of the Torah. Gemara says in Brachas and Daf Lamed Beis Amud Beis, V'yamer Rabbi Lazar said, Yom Shechar Beis Hamikdash, when the day the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, Ninalu, it was locked, Sharei Tefillah, the gates of Tefillah. Shenemar, like the pasuk says, Gam ki ezak v'ashaveya sasam tefilasi. Even if I cry out and scream, God closes out my tefillah. B'afal pi sheshari tefillah ninalu. Even if the gates of tefillah are locked, shari dimaloi ninalu. The gates of tefillah are not locked. Now, what does it mean the gates of tefillah are locked? So, what are we davening for if the gates are locked? Yeah, the answer is your home is also locked, but you get in because you have the key. So the gates of Torah are locked, but you have to have the key to access. You have to know how to open the locked gates. But Demois is an automatic entry. Tears have automatic entry. That's what the Gemara tells us. Says the Sefer Chasidim, a very powerful thing. He says tears could be so powerful that even if someone is a Rasha, and he's not Roi, and he's not a Zakai, the Rebbeinu Shalom could have Rachamim just Mikayach Hadema'is. Says the Sefer Chasidim, Ois Kuf Lamed, B'yoiches Tzadik Darkai, Yesh Adam, there's a man, She'eno zakai, he's not worthy. She'ikabel hamakom tfilasai. Ella bavor toikef tachanunim, only because of the strength of his supplication, v'dimas einav, and the tears of his eyes. Asher tamid boiche u'mischanein. Af al pi she'ein biyadoi zchus u'masim toivim. Even someone who has no merit, has no maisim, mekabel hakadosh baruch hu tfilasai v'oiseh chetzai. Hashem will accept the tefillah. One of the great Rishonim, the Shiltei Kibayrim, brings down that there are 3 types of tefillahs that are always listened to. One, of course, with a minyan. When you're down with a minyan, right, there's a stira in Psukim. One pasuk says, Mi kashem lekeinu b'chol koreinu elav. Who's like God? He always answers. And there's another pasuk that says, Dirshu Hashem b'hi matzai. Seek out Hashem when he could be found, which implies sometimes he can be found, sometimes he can't be found. What does the Gemara answer? Kan b'yachid, kan b'rabim. With the tzibur, God is always available. As a yachid, only sometimes. When are those times? Aser simei tshuva. So says the Shiltei Kibayrim, there are 3 tefillahs that are always accepted. Number 1, with a minyan. Number 2, aser simei tshuva. And number 3, with tears. Right? You can imagine. So
anytime with tears.
Anytime.
And Aseres Yemei Tshuva even alone.
So Aseres Yemei Tshuva even as an individual. A minyan, anytime. Tears. So you could imagine. Tears. Aseres Yemei Tshuva. Minyan. You can imagine a tefillah on Yom Kippur. Here you have a minyan. It's Aseres Yemei Tshuva. And you add demois. That's like the 3-pronged attack that cannot be turned away.
We just said that if you cry and you daven, it will be accepted.
Mm-hmm.
Look what happened to the 3 boys. Thousands cried and davened, and the tefillahs were not accepted.
They were accepted. God accepted them.
But
doesn't mean He gave them
for something else.
What does accepted mean? Accepted means
that's my question.
It's received warmly by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Does that mean you always get what you want?
Oh, okay.
The Shlach Kadosh, right?
That's a triple that becomes a home run.
That's a kind of but the connotation.
It's niskabel. It's never ninal. It's never locked. The gates are never locked. The Shlach Kadosh says on the pasuk Melayascha v'demacha lo'isa'acher. Literally, it's referring to truma. Don't delay giving your truma. However, the Shlach brings down from Rab Nachum HaBavli a great klal that bakashos and tfilos, when they're bedema, do not delay. In other words, God will not delay acceding to your request. God will not delay. Now, very interestingly, I'll tell you something very amazing. We know tefillah is analogous to karbanos, right? Shachris is keneged tamid shel shachar, mincha is keneged tamid shel ben rabayim, marav is keneged hektar chalavim ve'ivarim. What aspect of tefillah are the tears? That's like the Nisach Hamayim. Rabbeinu Bechai writes, Ukshem sha'atayin is karban, kach hadima b'shas tefillah, so to demois at a time of tefillah are kavan, keneged, Nisach Hamayim in our karbanas. The tears are like the Nisach Hamayim. And that's what Chazal say, Shari demois lo'inin alo. And Rabbeinu Yoina says, in a very interesting sefer, not in the Shari Tshuva, in a different sefer, in the sefer Shari Avodah, very little known sefer, he says, somebody who davens with tears, the Shari Demois are lo ninalu. And he brings down this idea of Rabbeinu Bechai, that the Demois are connected to Nisach Hamayim. And then he says, he brings down a Chazal, that when Yaakov Avinu was in Beisel, he did not stop pouring Nisach Hamayim. Which means, Chazal say, you want to know how much Yaakov Avinu was pouring? If you could count the amount of water in the Mei Tiberia, then you could count the tears of Yaakov Avinu. In other words, Yaakov Avinu was yored tremendous demois. Okay. With that, bearing that in mind, I want you to examine for a moment I want you to examine for a moment the last few psukim of the Torah. You get the original. The last few psukim of the Torah. We know at the end of the Torah, the last 8 psukim of the Torah, what does it say? It says, Vayamas Sham Moshe Eved Hashem. Yeah?
It's fine.
No. Get the pen. Vayamas Sham Moshe Eved Hashem. The psukim say that Moshe Rabbeinu, the Eved of Hashem, died. He passed away. And the big question is, who wrote those words? Who wrote in the Torah that Moshe died? If someone else wrote that Moshe died, then the Sefer Torah is puzzle. Sefer Torah had to be written by Moshe Rabbeinu. Elamai, Moshe wrote he died, but that would be sheker. How could Moshe write he died when he's alive? Elamai, Moshe Rabbeinu, after he died he wrote it. No, once you're dead,
you're not writing them.
You can't write Sefer Torah, you can't be Mashiach, and you can't do anything. Once you're dead, you're dead. That's it. You're gone. You're out of this world. So the question is, who wrote the last 8 psukim on the Torah? So we have Machlekes Tanan. Look at number 10. Vayamasham Moshe. Efsher Moshe Meis. Is it possible that Moshe died? V'kasav Vayamasham Moshe. Ela Adkan Kasav Moshe. Mikan Ve'elach Kasav Yehoshua. The last 8 psukim in the Torah were not written by Moshe. How could Moshe write that wrote that he died? Must be the last 8 psukim were written by Yoshua. That's the opinion of the Tanna Kama. Rav Meir says no. Efshir Sefer Torah Chaser Klum. Could you say the Sefer Torah was missing, and that, as if Moshe Rabbeinu did not write the whole Torah? V'hu Omer lo koyach Sefer Torah zeh. Ela HaKadosh Baruch Hu Omer. You know what the meaning is? God dictated. U'Moshe Koisev Bedema, and Moshe wrote it with tears. Moshe wrote it in tears. So we have Machlekes Tanna Kama against Rav Meir. If you look in the Gemara Bava Basra, the Gemara says a different Machlekes. Rabbi Yehuda says that Yehoshua ben Nun wrote it. Some say Reb Nechemia. And Reb Shimon says, how could that be? Then the Sefer Torah is missing. But rather, Moshe wrote it with tears. Says Reb Eliyahu Mizrahi, what does it mean Moshe Rabbeinu wrote it with tears? That means he didn't use ink. Normally, Moshe Rabbeinu took his quill, stuck it in the inkwell, and wrote the Torah. The last 8 psukim, who wrote it? Moshe wrote it. But instead of sticking his quill in the inkwell, he cried.
Yeah, black tears.
And he stuck the inkwell. He stuck the quill in the inkwell, and he wrote it with tears.
He had black tears.
I don't know what color the tears were. I wasn't there, but he wrote it. He wrote it with tears.
How can you write without ink?
So Freck, the Maharal of Prague, and Rabbi Yankel Bailish. First of all, you know what the halacha is? If you write a Sefer Torah in tears, imagine if you go to a cipher, and the cipher says, I have this Sefer Torah, it's $10,000. The real one, $30,000. But I have a Mahudur Dika Sefer Torah, I wrote it in tears. You want to buy it? You say, no, it's puzzle. A Sefer Torah written in tears is puzzle. What if you wrote the whole Torah in ink and one letter in a tear? It's also puzzle. So very nice, Moshe Rabbeinu was crying, he was crying. But then the Sefer Torah is puzzle. What does it mean that Moshe Rabbeinu wrote it in tears? The Maharal asks, also another question. How does he answer the question? The question was, if Moshe Rabbeinu died, how could he write Vayamasham Moshe? So what's the answer? He wrote it in tears? I don't care if he wrote it in crayons, magic markers, pen, pencil. You can't write Moshe died if he didn't die. What's the answer to the question? He didn't write it in pen. He wrote it in tears. Shkoyach. But how could he write sheker? I don't care what writing implement he used. So these are the questions of the Maharal. Right? Kaimalon Sefer Torah Shalakasa B'diyai Psula. Says the Maharal, it doesn't mean Chazal don't say Moshe kasav b'dima'os. If it would say Moshe kasav b'dima'os, that would mean he cried into a container and he used those dima'os to write the Torah. B'dema means Hazoirim b'dima. You know that song? It's a pasuk in Tehillim. Hazoirim b'dima. What does it mean? Those who plant with tears will harvest with joy. What does it mean to plant with tears? Not to put seeds in the ground, to put tears in the ground? What does it mean when you say to plant with tears? Plant with tears means you plant while you're crying. So when it says Moshe kasav b'dema, it doesn't mean he wrote the Torah in tears. That would be Apostle Sefer Torah. He wrote the Torah in ink, but he wrote it while he was crying. And now the question is, I don't care if he wrote it while he was crying, he's still writing Sheker v'chazav. He's not dead yet. How could he write Vayama Moshe? Says the Maharal, you ready for this? That since Moshe was crying over his Misa, that already is the beginning of his death. That already is the beginning of his death, and therefore it is not Sheker to write Vayamas Sham Moshe. Yeah? So the answer is, Moshe didn't write it in tears, he wrote it while he was crying. But since he's crying that he's going to die, that already is the beginning of the death process, and therefore it's not false to write Vayama Sham Moshe, even though... Okay? Now the question is, what does that mean? Since when is crying part of dying? What does that even mean? That crying, the language of the Maharal and the Gorari is Shikivan shayaboicha al misasai zehu haschalas hamisa. Now we're going to interrupt our regularly scheduled Maharal. I'm going to tell you a side explanation from the Vilna Gaon in this Chazal, Moshe kasav b'dema. What does it mean, Moshe kasav b'dema? We'll come back to Maharal in a minute. And by the way, the Vilna Gaon asks, Mima nafshach. He says both opinions do not really make sense. If the question on Rabbi Shimon was, question on Rabbi Yehuda was, how could Moshe be alive and write he died? So what's the answer? He wrote a b'dema. Well, what's the answer? Well, what is this supposed to mean? Elamai Moshe Rabbeinu Yehoshua wrote it? Well, then the Sefer Torah is Parsha. Says the Vilna Gaon, there's actually no machlekes. Everyone agrees Moshe wrote it with tears, and everyone agrees Moshe and Yehoshua ben Nun wrote it. So the question is, how could they both be true? Says the Vilna Gaon, you don't know what the word dema means. Dema does not mean tears. Dema, like the pasuk, Malayascha v'dimacha lo yisa'acher. Dimacha means something that truma got mixed into. You ever hear it? Demai. Dema. Dema means mixed up. Mixed up. Malayacha v'dimacha. It's irbov, a confusion. Which means like this. Everybody knows, we said this morning in Shachris, Davar tziva la'elaf dar, that the Torah was commanded at the end of 1,000 generations. Question is, it was only given in generation 26. So the Gemara says the Torah existed 974 generations before the world was given. What did it say in that Torah? In the Torah that existed before the world was given, did it say Parshas Kairach? It said that? It says the Chet HaMeraglim? It says the Chet of the spies? I mean, when the Torah was given, was Kairach learning every year Parshas Kairach? Every year on Shabbos Parshas Kairach, Kairach was being ma'ayin into his rebellion before it happened? Before when the Torah was given, the Jews had already in the Torah the Chet HaEgel. They're saying, well, this is very interesting. It's good to know what we're about to do. You know, one guy was making a horse. The other guy said, no, state in the Torah we make a cow. You know, what did it say in the Torah?
The Rabbi Shlomo created the world using the Torah.
So, but it said in the Torah all of these chataim, that the answer is, says the Vilna Gaon, when we say the Torah existed before the world was created, we know the letters of the Torah, and this is what the Ramban writes in his Hakdama to Chumash, the letters of the Torah are Shemois of Hashem, are names of God. To the point where if somebody would know how to combine the oisiyos to form the exact names of God, they would be able to create the world. That is why if even one little yud is missing, the whole Sefer Torah is possible because you're missing from the name of Hashem. What's the source that when you learn Torah you have to make a bracha before? Kishem Hashem Ekra. When I say the name of God, Havu Goydel Elokim, I have to praise Hashem. So when I learn Torah, which is the name of God, because the Torah is the name of God, you have to make a bracha. Says the Vilna Gaon, before the Torah was given, all you had was letters, the 600,000 letters. They were unformed as of yet. And as the Jewish history develops, the letters formed to fit what happened. Before Moshe Rabbeinu died, 99% of the Torah had already been formulated and combined to form words. Except for the last 8 psukim, because the last 8 psukim didn't have that. Moshe Kasav Bidema. Moshe just wrote the letters mixed up. And then after Moshe died, Yoshua wrote it. Moshe didn't write Vayom Hashem Moshe. It's Sheker, it didn't happen yet. Moshe Kasav Bidema. Moshe wrote it mixed up. And then Yoshua ben Nun codified it the way Hashem wanted. So both opinions are correct. When Moshe Rabbeinu wrote the whole Torah. It was not missing any letters. It's just the last 8 psukim were not written the way we have it today. And then after Moshe died, Yoshua wrote it the way Hashem wanted. Okay. But coming back to the Maharal. You ready for this, everyone? Everyone. Listen to this. What does the Maharal mean? That since Moshe Rabbeinu was beginning to die, and he was crying over his death, that already is the beginning of his Misa, and therefore he's allowed to write Vayom Hashem Moshe, right? That's what the Maharal said. Maharal said it doesn't mean Moshe wrote it in tears. It means he wrote it as he's crying. He wrote it as he's crying. He's allowed to write Vayom Hashem Moshe because he's already almost dead. He's crying. So, the Maharal elsewhere says a very interesting idea. Why is it that when the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, all the gates of Tefillah were locked except for the gates of tears? So Maharal explains philosophically. This is in Maharal in number 19 in his Chidushei Agados in Bava Metzia Daf Nun Tes. He says that the Beis Hamikdash was the place of Havaya, the place of creation, creating a new development, new existence. And therefore, when the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, all gates of new creation were locked. The gates of Tefillah. What are the gates of Tefillah? The gates of Tefillah attempt to make Hashem, inspire Hashem to give us new creation. But they were all locked, because the Beis Hamikdash is the source of all creation. But tears are not creation. Tears are destruction. When a person cries, that's like almost the decomposition of the body. Doesn't explain fully. He writes, tears are hefsid u'bittul ha'adam. Maharal writes elsewhere in Masechta Bava Basra Daf Tezvav that the demise that leave a person is the beginning of the decomposition of the guf, and it saps him of his strength. Okay, now I'm going to tell you an amazing thing. Says Achsam Sofer, if I were to ask you, where do tears come from? Yeah, a person cries. Where do they come from? So wait a minute, I drank water today, so they come from what I drank. There are tear glands. They're glands. Sometimes a child, the tear glands are blocked. They have to repair them. They're glands. But where do those glands produce that liquid from? What part of the body? Some Sofer writes that tears come from the dam halev, the lifeblood. The tears that a person emits comes from the dam halev. Some Sofer write, look at number 20. Yadua ki demois einayim bois midam halev hameshapich lamayim. In other words, what is the most critical part of the body that gives the body its life force, the blood of the heart, right? There's different blood. In an animal, in a human, the blood of the heart is the lifeblood. The lifeblood in agony and worry could be transformed to tears. That's the meaning of the pasuk, Shifchi kamayim libech. When you pour out your heart. You ever hear the expression? I pour out my heart. What do you mean? You don't pour out your heart. Maybe you cry. No! By crying, I am taking the blood of my heart and I'm pouring it out. That's the power of the tear. The tear is literally the life of a person. It's literally the life of a person. It's interesting, the Gemara in Gittin says that there are certain things that are mema'et one's zera, one's seed. Tears, right? The Sifrei Kabbalah say tears are mechaber for that avera. Why? Because that is the way, the tears transforms the life force of a person. It's the greatest act. You can't go in front of Hashem and give up your life. You can't do an Akedah. Can't do, I'll do that. But what's the most you could offer to Hashem? The closest you could come to, so to speak, offering your nefesh to Ribbon Shalom is bechia, is crying. It's like offering your nefesh. Because the tears, the bechia come, and therefore that could be the meaning of the Maral. That how could Moshe Rabbeinu write Vayom Moshe? He didn't die yet. The answer is he's writing it as he is crying. That is already the beginning of his misa. That's the beginning of his neshama's return to God.
Somebody's seed, that's the blood?
What?
So somebody's semen, that's the blood?
No, but that's also the life force. Shulchan Aruch says that it saps the person from his energy. It's not that's the kayach adam. In fact, the pasuk says in Acharemos about Yom Kippur, it says ki bayom hazeh yechaper, right? Ki bayom hazeh yechaper alechem, right? We say on Yom Kippur night, you don't say tiku b'chodesh shofar, right? What do you say? No. Instead of saying tiku after right before Kaddish, we say ki bayom hazeh yechaper alechem l'tarasam mikol chatoi seichem l'fnei Hashem tetaru. That's the pasuk. So right on Yom Kippur, ki bayom hazeh yechaper aroshe tevos bechia ki bayom hazeh yechaper. That's the mitzvah, so to speak, of Yom Kippur and Ne'ilah. And that's why Rabbi Yaakov Emden says the power of bechia, it is to the largest extent the greatest way and the furthest the person go, what he could offer to the Ribbon Shalom. And it could be then that we mentioned that what does bechia correspond to? When a person cries during tefillah, what aspect of a carbon is the bechia? So the tefillah is the carbon, and the bechia is the nisach hamayim. The nisach hamayim. So very possibly, on what Yom Tif is there a mitzvah of nisach hamayim? Sukkos. Isn't it interesting that the mitzvah of nisach hamayim follows Yom Kippur? Because where are we going to get that nisach hamayim from? On Sukkos. Perhaps, you know what the mitzvah of nisach hamayim is on Sukkos? All the bechiyos of Yom Kippur that were cried, l'tshuva, and in a manner of sadness. So what do? Ushavtem mayim b'sasayin mimaynei hayeshua. We draw forth all of those bechiyos and we offer it to Hashem b'simcha. And it's most interesting that if you look in Parsha Shlach, what follows the Chet HaMeraglim? What follows Chet HaMeraglim? Well, take a look in Parshas Shlach.
That's a nutshell. What is it? The the woman that has a license is after.
What follows? You know what mitzvah was given after the Chet HaMeraglim? The nisuchim that are poured on the mizbeach. So you say, what do the nisuchim have to do with the Chet HaMeraglim? The answer is the sin of the Chet HaMeraglim. They were boiche b'chia shachinam. They cried for nothing. Baruch said, no, that's not what kind of pouring I'm referring to. I'm referring to the real nisuchim, the nisach hayayin, the nisach hamayim. So therefore, that is possibly the connection between the Chet HaMeraglim and the mitzvah of nisuchim given in Parshas Shlach. And that is the advice of Rabbi Yaakov Emden, that we know the koyach of demois, that in general there are three types of tefillos that are neskabel, Maser Simei Tshuva, Minyan, Demois, and here you have all three combined together, and this is the explanation for the last 8 psukim in the Torah, how Moshe Rabbeinu could write Vayom Hashem Moshe, because this was the beginning of his Misa. The Demois are the Chilak Halev, it's the Dam Halev HaMeshapech Lamayim, that's the meaning Shivchi Kamayim Libech, and the Rebbeinu Shem should be Makabel, all of our tefillos, Berachamim Uveratzaim.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.